politicians are in that medium often quite repulsive. The number of professors between right and left has become extreme, and as a result, younger students are much less tolerant of opposing views. We have two conflicting human instincts, one of which was a natural curiosity about the world outside our village, and one that was a natural fear. Most people get their politics from their parents. The idea that conservatives think slavery was good, it's a bit mad.
Hello and welcome to Meeting People with me, Amal Pandya. Meeting People is a podcast where I have long conversations with rebellious, adventurous and sometimes courteous free spirits. Ed West, thank you very much for sparing the time. Welcome.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, welcome to the Meeting People podcast. So, as you may or may not know, I've had a few guests to talk about classical liberalism, so people from the IEA like Chris Snowden and Chris Niemitz.
Great guys.
Eamon Butler as well from the Adam Smith Institute. And I had someone who you may not know, a gentleman called Andrew Femister, who's a history lecturer at King's College London, who specialises in radical thought or radical progressivism or radical liberalism. And we kind of spent a lot of time fleshing those ideas out with those various guests. It feels like the next logical thing is to have someone to talk a bit about a less popular part of political thought at the moment, let's call it conservatism, and try and unpack it somewhat, see what the limit cases are, see where it's needed. Maybe it's due a revival in some way. And why I thought you'd be the perfect guest for it is I read your excellent book, Tory Boy, which came out a few years ago. Is it 2019?
Yeah, 2020. It came out the week that lockdown happened. So my pessimism was totally justified.
Yeah, so more pessimism as you come up. There we go, everyone. It's definitely worth the read. And we'll come up with some other things that Ed's written a bit later. Interestingly, Tory Boy's got a sort of Harry Enfield title.
Yeah,
is that the origin of the name?
Well, it was originally called Small Men on the Wrong Side of History, which is where the Substack name comes from. But the publishers changed it for the paperbacks for some reason. Publishers tend to do that. But yeah, I suppose that was an homage to the Harry Enfield character, which I suppose kind of summarises what people of my age thought of young Tories. And obviously it's got worse since. So, the book was about how basically, the idea that people become more right-wing and more conservative as they enter middle age is no longer true. Yeah. And I think there's been data since then that's kind of proven that people who are born from about the midpoint in the 1970s and beyond, they are not, as they've entered their 30s and 40s, they have not become more right-wing in their voting habits, and in many ways not even their lifestyles. And that's really the first time that's changed. It's just something I noticed amongst my friendship groups who were just becoming kind of even more liberal as they got older. Yeah. And I thought that represented a real kind of seismic social change that had become kind of permanent, which kind of left people with a kind of more conservative position.
One of the things that you flesh out is why that is, or you try to answer it from various perspectives. And what's really refreshing about your book is that you understand that there are limits to conservatism.
Right.
There are times when it goes wrong. There are times when it is applicable. There are downsides to what causes it as well as upsides. Reading it reminded me of another Harry Enfield sketch, which most people may or may not know. Is, the Women Know Your Limits sketch.
Yeah.
So for people who haven't seen that,
Mr. Chumley Warner.
Yeah. It's set in, I'm guessing the 40s, or just after the war, and it's very black and white. It's a very stuffy dining table.
Map of the globe with Britain gigantic, even bigger than the rest of Europe.
Exactly, and there's sort of dinner. There's polite dinner conversation going on amongst stuffy upper class men and some upper class women, and the subject turns to politics. I think it's the gold standard. Whether we should leave or stay on the gold standard.
Right.
And the men are talking, and then all of a sudden, one of the women sort of pipe up, and there's sort of tension in the air, and the lady kind of goes, "I think we should stay on the gold standard, or I think we should leave the gold standard," and gives a very thoughtful argument either way. And the men are kind of aghast at this, the fact that this woman has decided to kind of pipe up and make her.
I do remember that sketch, yeah.
And the kind of the narrator's voice then comes in saying, women, you must know your limits, don't step out of your lane, this is your kind of stay in your wheelhouse.
Yeah.
And it kind of feels like people of a small c conservative persuasion have had that done to them for the past, let's say, 10, 15 years, where they have something interesting to say about how certain problems have manifested.
Oh, so we're now the women. Oh, right.
Exactly.
I don't mean I was Mr. Chung Warner.
No. So
right.
You'll be in a social. One will be in a social gathering, and we'll be talking about economic problems or crime or whatever it might be. And a conservative may try and come above the parapet and go, well, maybe it's to do with kind of a decline in marriage or something.
Yeah.
And everyone else will be like, conservatives, know your limits. This is, you've had your chance. Is that a kind of quite a tortured sort of? It just made me think. Would you see that?
I think our ideas are fundamentally unpopular on certain levels. Probably the main one is the darker viewpoint of human nature, which conservatives take, which is incredibly unpopular, and I think is very unsuited towards the kind of late 20th century mediums. Television has a huge effect on people. It really does encourage a much more sentimental worldview, and that's probably accelerated with social media short form, which is now the dominant, which is like 1 minute videos, which is just television but like stupider. Conservative politicians are in that medium often like quite repulsive. If you've ever been to any kind of right-wing gathering and you look at the people talking and think, God, we are loathsome, we're like the bad guys. It's like visually conservatism comes across, not visually, but when it's articulated, it can come across as cruel or callous. I think it actually works better in print as an argument. And that comes down to, I think, our fundamental idea about man being fallen, and tied up, including to sort of genetic ideas, because progressives tend to believe in the blank slate, and maybe I'll come back to that, but that's such a huge part of the progressive worldview. And then if you don't believe in the blank slate, then those kind of ideas tend to fall apart. So the kind of, even, like the word kindness is kind of like left-coded now, because like being kind is seen as
fairness
saying,
as well,
fairness. Oh yeah, fairness even more so. I mean, fairness tends to just mean communism, but in the absence, a huge part of it, in the absence of religion and a kind of religious doctrine and a religious structure, Christianity in this case, people's kind of moral anchor tends to become kind of secular, but it also tends to become political and left-wing.
Right.
So being left-wing is about being kind, it's been about being fair, it's about giving and sharing. And this becomes kind of like almost like a faith with its own, creedal matters. And so if you're a conservative, you are sort of outside of that faith and that religious group. And people instinctively tend to distrust people who have different beliefs to them. Yeah. It's just very ingrained in us. And just as kind of religious hatreds in the West have kind of died down in the last couple of hundred years, they've kind of been replaced by political one. Political sectarianism, which is now far more developed in the States, but is also very much here, which brings quite similar aspects to old religious sectarianism. Like, I wouldn't want to live next to someone who believed these things. I definitely wouldn't want a family member to believe one of these things. The idea that people who believe these different ideas are like generally like bad. They want the worst society. They are kind of a threat to the social order. These are all the arguments people made against religious tolerance in the 17th century, which now people would look back and say, oh, that's ridiculous. But they generally believed if you had this belief, you were a threat to the society and you were evil. And I think as the left has become very dominant in certain sectors, obviously academia is the most obvious example. The media, if you look at the data on how journalists tend to see themselves, it's completely drastically changed since the 60s. But also the medical profession, even other areas. Obviously, most areas of the States, people in my local council were apparently all cheering and drinking champagne when Margaret Thatcher died. Whether you like or not, it doesn't. I doubt that they would do the same for a politician on the left. And I don't think when Tony Benn died, there was...
many conservatives sort of
no, exactly.
parties.
No, I think there would have been bad form, but it becomes, it's human nature that if you end up in a kind of social, structural group setting where you never meet people with different political belief, you will tend to start to hate them and start to think the worst of them. And I think that's just happened, most extremely in academia, where, the kind of imbalance in the number of professors between right and left has become extreme, and as a result, younger students, are much less tolerant of opposing views. This is obviously a very well-trodden kind of like cultural issue, but I do think it's important that people entertain the opposing views, because even for their own sort of sanity and kind of well-being, it's quite good to stress test your own beliefs and see how they come across, when tested.
So let's try and at some point unpack why that has become so. Why is academia or the media or whatever it might be become so overwhelmingly one-sided? But before we do that, can we kind of go back to the beginning or take a step back? You talked about original sin, I think. You talk about the blank slate. So can we start with Pelagius, St Augustine?
Right. So
who were they? Why did those two people matter to where we are today?
Well, in very brief summary, this is the early. This is what we're supposed to call the Dark Ages, the very late antiquity. And the two Christian writers who basically summed up the view about whether mankind was inherently wicked or whether mankind was good. St Augustine is the sort of original, I suppose, the original conservative in the sense that his view of man was that, we are fallen. He famously was, kind of sickened by his own lust.
Right, yes.
And his, own behaviour with women and all that. I think I might have mentioned, he's like the prototype of, how the culture imagines conservatives, which is all kind of like sexually tortured kind of people. And I don't know, I wouldn't know enough about theology to say with confidence, but I think overall, throughout the church history, the Augustine's idea about mankind being fallen has been certainly more influential. And that is kind of the precursor. So, like politics, basically, as we understand it, sort of really starts in the 18th century, the French Revolution. And that's soon after we start, the term conservative is used. Liberal's a bit older, but these ideas, and socialist doesn't come about until a few decades later in the 9th century, but these ideas have sort of distant ancestry in old Christian beliefs, but this division between supporters of the existing hierarchy and the people who wanted to bring down those hierarchies really begin in France.
So you're kind of the manifestation of believing that mankind is inherently wicked. Is that was Hobbes effectively that we need to kind of have a stability, we need to have order, we need to sort of have a strong approach to crime and punishment, and that's the kind of precursor in some ways to conservatism.
Hobbes is a funny figure. He's just incredibly pessimistic and gloomy about mankind, about his own prospects, about everything. He lives to a ripe old age. You can actually see where he lived at Bessie Hardwick's house, which name I forget, in Yorkshire. He was a tutor to the king. He was, he lived from the late Tudor era all the way throughout the Stuart times. And he was sort of basically persecuted by both sides during the Civil War, upset them for different reasons. But his basic understanding is, yes, without strong authority, everyone's going to just start killing each other. I think he's essentially right. If you look at stuff like, like murder rates or homicide rates before state formation, I don't think we've ever found one where there isn't appallingly high rates, up to 50% of males getting killed. So he's always been contrasted to Rousseau. We could also talk about Locke. It's slightly different. Rousseau, writing a bit later, he is, although he's, you know, he has a sort of conservative angle to him, aspect to him, but he's also the kind of prototype of the 1960s man who just thinks, oh, you know, mankind is inherently good, and it's just like the system, man, that's keeping you back, you know, keeping you in chains.
The noble savage, is that right?
The noble savage, you know, man is free but is kept in chains. And, you know, he was sort of surrounded by sort of loads of women who fancied him because he taught the load of like trendy crap, and he treated them really badly. And, you know, it's kind of, he was a 1960s man before the time. And that's the kind of, that became much more popular after the Second World War, which is obviously a big kind of like psychological shock to the Western natures. Lots of our ideas about human nature become, strangely, you think ironically, become much more positive. So the idea becomes promoted that humans are inherently good. There is much more of like child-focused education, that children you know, don't need to be sort of disciplined and bust around. They can just kind of find out what they, you know, want to do. And when I was growing up in the 80s, you know, under Ilya, I don't know if you remember them, the kind of communists who used to run schooling and education in London. That was, you know, very kind of popular, fashionable thing. And it's kind of Blair who got rid of a lot of it. But even, you know, in all areas, the idea of like man has been a gentle creature. I mean, even you know, in archaeology, the pots aren't people ideas became very popular. That, you know, when you see there's like one culture living in one place, and then 1,000 years later they're all gone and someone else has come along, and then the idea was like, oh no, they all just kind of came along and adopted the culture of the people next door, and that's how they all suddenly all look different. And then now we look at DNA, it's like, no, the 9th century people were right. Like, it was like Conan the Barbarian every time. The people next door just came in and like killed them all, and that's what really happened. But the Rousseauian idea about humans being inherently good becomes much more popular only really in the late 20th century. And it's still, I mean, even though the noble savage has been kind of completely, as far as I know, pretty much discredited amongst all kind of Stone Age peoples we've looked at. It's still, I suppose it's still very popular. It's just a kind of more optimistic way of seeing the world, right? Because
but that from there, I think you said it was from Pelagius, that kind of from there springs natural rights or natural law, where, you know, human beings are fundamentally good, and therefore they need to be unleashed, and need to be not have barriers put in their way. And this is a big part of radical thought, which we covered with Andrew Femister, and that sort of like, where I'm sympathetic to it is that kind of caveat emptor, like we need to let people make their own mistakes and learn the kind of downside of those mistakes, rather than try and nanny them or tell them what. So that's where I'm trying to kind of understand, where does the, you know, that view of conservatism that doesn't like state interference because the state shouldn't be telling you how to live your life. How does that kind of marry with the fact that actually it springs from original sin, and we need to kind of.
I think the problem for conservatism is that a lot of these things were done by the church, basically.
Right.
So the decline of conservatism in Britain is so intimately linked to the decline of the Church of England, because you'd have the church, which would be your moral guide, and then your bishops would tell you what to do, and then you'd have your politicians who basically ran the country. And now we have politicians who want to be moral guides, so they'll talk about everything about whether a rapper should be playing at a concert, and they love to get involved in these issues, which are essentially moral ones. And I'm not sure it's any use MPs saying anything about that, because no one respects them, and their job is basically to come out with laws which don't backfire spectacularly, which is not very good at doing. But society does need moral guides. There has to be someone. We're not kind of complete, free radicals. So without the church, who does it? I guess it probably ends up being the state, but they're just...
or the media, as you put it. The media likes to be the moral guardian.
The media, but I mean, if you look at, look at most journalists, do you want these people to, being your moral guide? They're, most of us are just kind of degenerates, this, awful people. And the media, even the media now is just way too anarchic, which has kind of happened with all institutions now. They're all sort of breaking down into their own little things. So you as a society you basically want a series of like rules, instructions for people to how to go about their lives, which are kind of they can play with. They say, look, and this is like the Charles Murray idea. It's like, so it's best like you do this. It's best like you don't start getting into drugs. It's best you don't get someone pregnant in your teens, and it's best you try to focus on these kind of core things, and that's the best way to go through life. But there isn't actually there aren't enough kind of those signals, instructions from society to tell people that, and a lot of people get trapped. And it's not just people in the underclass. You see a lot of people completely messing up their lives because they're surrounded by basically like a pool of kind of like counter wisdom about their it's like the Reddit things. Like if you ask Reddit, so no, you should just leave your husband. It's like, well, no, it's like disastrous things to do generally.
It's one of the surefire way to screw your kids up is to be very wealthy, because then they don't you tend to be a terrible parent. If you're very wealthy, you spoil your kids. You don't let them. You don't spend any time with them, and then if there's no moral anchor, whether it's religion or some sort of adherence to custom, which is what you've talked about, like there's sort of customs that have built up over time that are a guardian against anarchy. Effectively, like if you do these things that people have done for a few thousands of years, they're likely to probably
it might not work, but the chances are it's probably you're playing the odds. Are wealthy people more likely to be terrible parents, do you think?
Super wealthy people.
Right, okay.
So like...
I think my kids would like to take that gamble, but maybe they don't have a choice.
Well, I think, the Vanderbilts, for example, are great. I guess there are certain families where that's not always true, but the big robber baron families,
right.
You had that entrepreneurial kind of low expectations but high graft founder, and then the kids just degenerate because they are... entitled,
that's probably regression to the mean, though, isn't it? Right? I mean,
yes.
Like one genius is not going to produce necessarily genius, and it's not going to continue. I mean, you have to be very lucky in a family to do that. So eventually, they're going to mess it up. I don't know.
But let's say a kind of lower mid. If those kids were born into a lower middle class family in a suburb, which where the norm was to kind of
there would be like social norms and social expectations would guide you, and that's an important kind of framework for most people's life. I mean, I think I think I could do pretty good Turing test of like ideological Turing test of being a liberal. I think there are lots of good arguments for liberalism in its kind of truest sense. I just read the Adrian Woolridge book on liberalism is very good. And I think the main thing is like, so that the 80-20 rule. So, social reforms, most people benefit from them. And then for a small number of people, they're disastrous.
Right.
And then you still have to ask, well, overall, it's good, right? The most famous one, probably like divorce reform in the 60s. That's obviously disastrous for a lot of people. But if you look, you can actually probably quantify that in like declining female suicides. Like more people have probably been liberated by that. Overall, and if you look at gay rights, easily in an 80-20 margin, probably more. I wonder if with progressivism these things inevitably have to be taken to like their total extreme, like trans rights being maybe an example of that. Maybe there is something in the kind of progressive mindset that means things always have to be taken because it's kind of a competition.
Yeah, it's that purity spiral. So you're a vegan, you start a vegan,
right,
and then you kind of go, well, almonds are really bad for the environment because
then you end up a breatharian who eat nothing.
Yes, exactly. you can't eat avocados, and what I think is interesting about conservatism versus other ideas is that the Western mind is sort of very easily seduced by kind of linear rationality. So like what I mean by that is like, if a certain amount, which you've touched on, if a certain amount of something is good, then double the amount must be double as good. And then you keep going, and you get that with, one of the most sort of skeptical, pessimistic, kind of self-conscious people was Darwin, for example.
Right.
But his followers took his stuff to such an extreme, and the same with Plato, arguably, the same with Hume. and yeah, that kind of belief that you talk about eschatology, is that the right way to pronounce the word? Where like there's a promise,
so,
eschatology, versus like conservatives that kind of are instinctively fearful of sort of things that are universal and can save the world.
Right. You mean sort of heading towards an end time where all kind of like conflict resolved and everything's good?
All we need is more socialism. Yeah. More socialism. We'll get there. And
yeah. Yeah, I mean, one aspect of it is just, life is a balance and it's a trade-off and it's a mixture of I mean, I think in most, perhaps one argument for what we're going through now is, like if you're steering a boat, you're like overcompensating, you're kind of, constantly going in this, and we're just in a period of kind of massive overcompensation at the moment. And identity politics is a reflection of that, and it's not like the worst thing in the world. I think I compare like modern leftism to like type 2 diabetes. It's like a product of like our lives been actually really good.
Yes.
So it's better to live in a society where people got type 2 diabetes rather than like cholera or Black Death. Yeah. And it's because we are relatively well off and most of our problems are dealt with that we have to start focusing on that stupid stuff. And that's maybe just a kind of correction.
There's what I see is kind of two blind spots to conservatism. So let's cover one of them, which you talk about in the book. So it's quite popular amongst internet commentators to say, well, actually, fascism is a left-wing thing.
Yeah.
And, it's the clues in the name, National Socialism.
Yeah.
And
that was very big around 2008.
Yeah. And it was quite, an easy thing to say, well, you're a bit more, circumspect about that. And you say, well, actually, there are some, between fascism and conservatism, there are some overlaps or some roots.
Yeah, they are definitely, related in some ways. I mean, fascism, I suppose it's probably easier to talk about Nazism, slightly different, but, it used revolutionary class kind of tactics and violence to counter the left, but it was definitely a right-wing philosophy.
Yeah.
Because even if it had some ideas which are contrary to kind of mainstream conservatism, it was anti-liberal by its very nature, anti-liberal, anti-communist. It was also obviously like very racist, and despite what the Democrats are the real racists meme, the conservatives are naturally kind of more group orientated. It's one of the things that you can call it racism, or you can call it whatever term, kind of group preference.
This is where you're kind of naturally, there are certain people who are naturally more fearful of outsiders,
right?
Whether maybe race oriented or maybe just
right. You say, well,
someone turns up outside your tribe and you're like, actually, let's be careful about this person.
You can go back to a lot of it. So the interesting stuff, which I think actually, even some of the stuff written has probably been debunked now because everything in psychology is fake, right?
Yeah.
But there are certain personality traits, and some of them do correlate with politics. Openness to ideas is one of the 5 big personality traits, and that correlates very much with conservatism. So people who tend to be on the left, especially people who identify as liberal, they like novelties more. So they're more likely to travel. I mean, one of the things they found when they did denazification after the war in Germany was they worked out how often people had been abroad and how from many foreign languages they were, and obviously huge correlation between how much they were likely to support the Nazis.
Right.
Because people who support Nazis didn't tend to like foreigners very much. Yeah. So that those traits obviously correlate with politics. If you did travel, if you worked out how many people, how often people went abroad, they would much more likely be on the left. And so that, that we have 2 conflicting human instincts, one of which was a natural curiosity about the world outside our village, and one that was a natural fear. There's, for hundreds of years, there's a chance someone turns me a village, they're going to give you the plague, and you're all going to die. So it's kind of a natural kind of human fear. And that is countered by that curiosity, which is probably one of the best traits amongst people who called liberals, progressives. And that openness to ideas is one reason why there is always an imbalance in the arts, because openness tends to correlate with left-wing politics. I mean, so does neuroticism. I mean, those things are not unrelated. So, all those kind of stereotypes are true. So yeah, like it's no, for people to say, it's no point denying that conservatives tend to be more narrowly attached to their tribe in that sense. Conversely, people on the left are probably more ideologically attached to their tribe. Like their tribe is people who agree with them on politics. It's like refugees welcome but not Tories kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they're obviously completely ignoring the fact that a lot of these outsiders will not have socially liberal views, and that's just kind of thing that people have completely tried to put out their minds without, thinking about the consequences.
And how much of politics is you're kind of you're drawn to supporting someone or a side because you find the other side more annoying than you do your side?
Oh, it must be. I mean, that must be the reason for a huge factor, right?
Yeah.
I think, so many Americans vote because they just can't stand the other side. And loads of people voted Trump and they can't stand him.
Yeah.
As an example, they just can't stand Democrats even more.
I'm not a, the man's got many flaws, which we're all aware of. But I kind of preferred watching meltdowns about him winning than I would have. Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's disastrous, and now we're all worried that the global economy is going to collapse. But we had the lulls at the time, and it was
it was worth it. But sorry, just going back to the fashion. That's where the kind of know your limits thing maybe comes from. Is that conservatism or parts of it got taken to an extreme. It manifested in World War II.
Yeah, no, I think it's completely tainted by association. And Daniel Bell calls it he called the Nazis the last ugly gasp of the right in kind of culture, because already in the 30s artists were overwhelmingly moving to the left because of the Spanish Civil War and the Depression, and that was kind of after that conservatism was basically intellectually dead, because no one really, you just like 2 world wars, you've lost like tens of millions of people in Europe. There wasn't that much of a desire to sort of defend the old order in the same way because it was so tainted. And so, culturally since then, the left has been very much dominant.
And was there an element of as you say, 2 world wars, millions of people have died. Let's just have a blast. Let's just shag around. Doesn't matter how much, we just give free stuff to everyone, free university for everyone, because we're just exhausted, and we don't want to be told that actually, probably being married and not traveling and or getting a good job and having a family and staying in your suburb is probably the right way to be. It's like there was a sense of kind of cultural exhaustion. Or I think there was.
That is funny enough. Reading about the 20s, that seems to happen more after the First World War. There was a kind of reaction where people were actually purposefully, only amongst a certain kind of elites, were living a very hedonistic life in response to the First World War, because they just had the trenches and they just wanted to sort of shag around and drink and whatever. In the 1950s, was quite a conservative decade in most of the West, especially the States. Religious attendance actually sort of briefly went up, and then the sort of 60s came along. I think there was definitely a sense amongst the boomers when they were younger, they were kind of revolting against the parents, sort of thing. There was like, we're not fighting the war. And obviously more so in Germany, there was this sense that, our parents did bad things, which they did. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's hard to sort of take away the sort of technological aspect of this. Like without the pill, certain aspects of the sexual revolution were definitely happening before the pill, because you can find out by how many shotgun weddings there were. But it wasn't quite the same thing. People were already shagging around a bit, but they weren't.
Talk about the button very quickly. That was quite funny.
The button?
Yeah, the invention of the button.
The invention of the button, 13th century. And it completely changed how, clothes became gendered for most people, as they say now. So you could actually see. And like moral writers at the time were outraged. They're just disgusting. You can see.
Before it was shapeless sacks.
Yeah, you're just like literally like you were wearing a cloth and like a peasant. And then all of a sudden, these kind of racy tops, and people liked. And men and women like walking around and showing their bodies, and this caused outrage. People blame the Black Death on it and everything.
Yes, so the button was the pill, and so you kind of, because of that, you create this ideological blind spot because people are so repulsed by, they're the baddies. The way you described how, like, if you go to a conservative gathering, you kind of feel. People on the left they cannot see value in that area of political thought. And you kind of talk about,
I think people think they're just unkind, and I don't know. When I was growing up, like there was a certain vibe within the Tory party which is quite repulsive, and you see that, and even I feel that even that I'm right wing, and I think that as well. It's like when you see like the Bush, administration and Cheney and like Rumsfeld all together, and just saying, wow, these guys would be the baddies in the film, right? They just look like baddies. They're like on the side of evil, violent, corporations and all that kind of stuff. I just think maybe it's just because we've all been kind of raised in this visual kind of Star Wars culture, where that's how we see. Like,
so do you agree that the kind of the medium is the message in many ways?
I do think television had a huge effect on the culture in that sense, and it definitely informs how people get their political views if they're not kind of like coached in other ways. On the other hand, most people get their politics from their parents. So there is, to a certain extent. So there is that.
When you talk about the kind of culture being dominated by the left for films, TV, you quote Lisa Goldman in the book. I've got a quote up here that you.
I should say, by the way, obviously I read the book years ago. I probably forgot everything. I probably wouldn't agree with anything in it now.
Well, I do want to come onto that. It's kind of, now that you've got some distance from it,
right?
What are the reflections? But this was quite, I'm not quoting you, I'm quoting her, who you quoted. So she was the artistic director of the Soho Theatre, who, when she was, someone must have challenged her, like, why are there no...
I do remember that, yeah.
Why are all the plays left-wing? Why don't you do any kind of conservative... And she goes... what would a right-wing play have to offer? Anti-democracy, misogyny, bigotry, nostalgia of all kinds. Let's get back to a white Britain, that the slave trade had a civilizing influence, that women should stay in the home.
I'd watch that.
Yeah, but she's a smart lady, I assume. She can't believe that 40% of the electorate, or 40% of people who vote, genuinely think that. Maybe, do you think they genuinely do, or is that...
I don't know. I don't know how much people just say things off the cuff. I just thought, I remember that it just seemed like a really funny thing, because the idea that people thought, conservatives think slavery was good, it's a bit mad. I suppose that's a kind of caricature version of the different ideas, conservatives. So, conservatives generally, depending on how you view it, are more sceptical about more women in the workforce. Even though it's much more Spurs saying it, they would be they would see the value of there being more women looking after children. They just wouldn't. No politician would say that, but I think overall, if you polled people by how they voted, they see it, and it'd be like a much more like normative family thing. As I say, conservatives would have more right-wing views about race on average and I think, that would probably, if you could probably poll people by every party, that would probably be justified. So I think those are just kind of caricature versions. But the arts thing is funny because lots of, until relatively recently, there were much of the arts was dominated by right-wingers. It's quite a relatively new thing, the idea that, and out of that, has come the idea that art should be about politics. It should be about being an activist and pushing a message. And I think that's had a really kind of corrosive effect on art generally. It's just so boring, and it's just kind of running thing where I feel like I have to go to the theatre because I'm just going to otherwise turn into a moron who's like an anti-culture kind of like Daily Express reader. And literally every time I go to the play, it's just the same.
Yeah, like you're equally scathing about the conservative side, where you say it's sort of deteriorated into sort of anti-intellectual yobbery in some ways, kind of shock jocks.
Yeah, there is definitely
sort of, I don't want to name, but like, there's no sort of sensible people don't, or intellectual people aren't able to kind of articulate what parts of conservatism are worth following. Is that? The kind of the shock jock element is a big thing. There's a sort of element within the right which is against
nice things. You know, like if you admit to like liking nice food or going to nice places in the south of France, you're just like a traitor when you should only just eat like the worst crappy
Muesli
British food. Yeah, exactly.
Avocado loving.
And that's it's like, okay, the left is really, I mean, this Christian Niemitz is always, you know, this is one of his regular funny jokes, you know, he's just like, the left is really good at those things, just like let them have it, it's fine.
Yeah.
But, you know, on a kind of more intellectual level, I suppose there is a unwillingness to articulate what we believe in. I bet, you know, I suppose that a lot of it comes, you know, if it comes down to a few core points, say, if you're on the right, you probably, the most important thing is probably unintended consequences. That's what you believe in. So this is something that our lawmakers are, you know, currently terrible at understanding. And I think it's partly because MPs...
Whatever party they're from.
Yeah, the Tories were just as bad. You know, the most obvious example... So the Green Party kind of depressed and worried me, and the idea that people actually want to vote for them makes me like quite sad, because they just seem like obviously stupid to me, but what can you do? You know, like rent controls have been tested hundreds of times, and it always has the same result, and it doesn't matter if you try to explain to people, it's like, it's not going to help the situation. That's like a classic unintended consequence.
It makes you feel good doing it.
It makes you feel good doing it, but it's not actually going to solve like anything you want to do. You know, our previous government did lots of stuff about like housing regulation, which wouldn't have even actually saved anyone's lives in any way, but has just made housing just, you know, so much harder. Like the modern slavery legislation has just meant loads of people just arriving here and claiming asylum through it. It's just like all sorts of stuff about you know, equality regulation, which is a classic of our time. The current, you know, drama. Tesco are now fighting this case, which was going to put up the price of food hugely, because one group of workers are paid more, and they happen to be men, mostly men, and one group of workers paid less, who happen to be mostly women, but they're doing two completely different jobs. And the ruling, you know, our system, which has kind of some communist aspects to it, now states that's going to be against the law. And this is the thing, it's basically bankrupted Birmingham City. So the people who, you know, create this legislation don't seem to have any understanding of like what the actual
human nature as well.
Right, because people respond to incentives. You know, like youth unemployment is terrible at the moment, and we also have really high minimum wage for young people. My eldest is 17. It's very hard for her friends to get a job in the same way that once upon a time most people aged 16 probably had a job. It just seemed the complete normal thing. You have a part-time job, obviously. If you make it really hard, if you make regulation really hard, then employment goes down. So I think, you know, so there are different things, what I suppose you say, like a conservative view of history and a conservative inclination towards more traditional values, and then a kind of core set of beliefs which would make you oppose the left. And unintended consequences, the kind of latter, example of that. Yeah. I mean, one of the problems with conservatism and like articulated conservatism, you know, Scott Alexander had a really good piece once. I mean, he's done loads of really good pieces. And there was lots of, you know, young people saying, oh, you know, they're sort of reactionaries because they want to, because they think, you know, we've all gone down the wrong turn. And he actually goes through people and says, you know, what year would you stop? Like, what year would you go back and thought, actually, no, after that? So, and, you know, in most cases, even if you self-identify as being right-wing, you're probably like the 70s, or like as far back as you're going to go. Because most of the reforms up to that point, which have survived the test of time, have overall been, you know, conformed to the 80-20 rule. I mean, there's lots of things that have now been reversed, like prison reform, which was like disastrous, some of the education reforms. But, you know, the bad ideas from the 60s, a lot of them have started to go back. So it's not so much of an issue. So, you know, one of the things that I suppose I would probably actually consider myself less conservative and more and just like being right wing, I think, because, you know, I suppose there's a realization that there is conservatism is slightly associated with the kind of period before the sort of the great change in our society in the 60s.
Yeah.
well, you can be right wing, but you just have, you're part of the modern world, but your viewpoints are towards this certain idea of what human nature is like and how we should run a society as a result.
And
plus, I'm not voting for the Tory party again, so
yeah. You wrote more darkly. Who knows what path the right will go without Christianity keeping the insanity in check?
Yeah, I feel like that. I was thinking about it the other day. Someone reminded me that I think that's not prophetic. I think maybe I was right. I started thinking about the Nick Fuentes phenomenon and the gropers amongst the youngs in America.
Can you explain that for people who don't know?
Well, I'd never seen one of his videos until it was sent to me by a friend who's actually Jewish, and it was some Zionist sort of group or something where they were kind of laughing at one of his sketches about Israel because he was talking about how much because Nick Fuentes is like
he's an American kind of shock jock. Is that right-wing young guy?
He's a right-wing young guy. He leads the Groypers, who are kind of like extreme right, kind of, I suppose you call them white nationalists. I don't know. They're like very anti-Semitic. And their whole thing is basically, America's all gone wrong because it's become less white, and probably the people who are most responsible for that are Jews. I think I don't know if that'd be an unfair characterization of what they're saying. It seems like
pushback. I don't know.
But anyway, he was doing this video about Israel, and they hate Israel because and they Israel controls America, etc. And he was complaining about Israel, but he was doing it in quite a funny way, and people who liked Israel thought it was very funny. But he's obviously a really funny guy. He's very entertaining. If you're a teenage boy in this kind of state of moral anarchy, which is teenage boyhood at the moment, I can see why he's, very kind of quite an attractive idea. When I talk about moral authority, like the old moral authority of the churches, so basically collapsed in the 60s, like in some countries very quickly, like France, and some countries more slowly. But it was kind of replaced by a sort of, a centre-left secular, like longhouse authority where, the gravest sins are racism and sexism. Be kind. Yeah. But their moral authority is kind of built on nothing as well, right? Yeah. And so if their moral authority just collapses and a generation younger than them don't accept it, I mean, that's Nick Fuentes' thing. It's like he just comes out and says, I'm a racist, because if that's the only thing you accuse me of, I'm just going to admit to it. And after that, there's nothing you can do.
Just disarmed.
Yeah, exactly. You've taken away the magic power, right? So I think, I don't know enough, young people anywhere, but young people in the States to know how influential they are. But that apparently, that way of thinking is quite popular amongst young Republican activists in the States. And it kind of makes sense because it's like a truly post-Christian kind of worldview.
Is it a reversion to, this is like the manosphere thing, right? So all these male internet influencers who kind of espouse some form of strength and domination.
Right.
And is this that, as you say, if you remove Christianity, is it kind of a reversion to classical antiquity or pre-Christian kind of Roman times where strength is the moral code?
It seems like that. I would never call myself any kind of expert on the manosphere there because I always get confused between different people. In the sense that, yes, Christianity, it values, weakness, sanctifies weakness, which is, when Nietzsche sort of criticized it. Progressivism is a sort of runaway Christianity in a sense. It's got so many similar traits to Christianity, but, without the kind of idea of original sin, but with some other ideas actually accelerated. And one of them is the valoration of weakness. Like Tom Holland's quote about modern politics is about who gets to be on the cross is entirely correct. And, you win an argument by becoming the victim, by making yourself the victim. And it's entirely possible that a group of mostly young men, because politics is now so divided along sex lines, just completely reject that and say, no, I don't care if you're the victim. You're a victim because you're weak and pathetic.
It'll have an equal and opposite effect.
I'm, why not go to a sort of pagan kind of worldview? But, I do sense that is always going to be a minority view. Partly, I think, because Western societies, the moral leadership has always been female-dominated, generally. Which I know sounds strange because the church was men only, but The fact that women are overwhelmingly on the progressive left makes me think it's still going to be dominant.
You talk a lot about status, right? So like being worried about local crime or worried about, or like not liking lots of sex scenes or lots of violence on TV is quite a low status.
Mary Whitehouse, when I was growing up, it was like,
and you know, like Christianity in its origins was a high status. You know, all the Romans wanted to get with the Christian. You know, the Christian women kind of drove.
Well, yeah, eventually,
so it was a high status thing to be Christian.
Women, it did win by. It definitely had more women in its early days, and men were secondary converts.
This is Ben-Hur, right? This is the Roman centurion wanting to kind of, he's fallen in love with a Christian woman and sort of.
I can't remember. I watched it when I was. Is that what happens? I mean, that happened. The first English and the first French king of.
Quo Vadis, sorry, not.
Quo Vadis. Okay, that's a great. Is that Richard Burton? Is that one?
No, it is. It's not, and the guy plays Nero, who's brilliant. The actor.
Oh, Peter Ustinov, is
it? Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the first
an American actor who plays the centurion. I can't remember his name now, but
Montgomery Clift.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know. No, I'm just.
Yeah.
Well, the first English and French kings who converted to Christianity were secondary converts. Their wives, have persuaded them to become Christian. So that was how it spread. Similar, Methodism was very female-dominated. Obviously, we have much more data about that. Same in evangelical Christianity in Latin America. Because men, it's important to men when they're proving themselves to women to seem moral, because it's such an important quality and a trait in the man, because there are lots of really immoral men. And if you're a woman, it's a huge risk that the guy's going to be horrible to you. And a good... proxy for that is seeing what his politics are, because if he has nice politics, then as far as I'm concerned, he's probably more likely to be nice, probably more likely to be educated for a start. He's probably, with caveats, less likely to be a sociopath, because he is actually attuned to what the prevailing moral norms are. Although the problem is that people just lie.
They do the cuttlefish thing that
they just pretend to sort of be left wing, but. I do. I think the general trend is that women will have more influence on men than vice versa in these political views.
And to use another Tom Hollandism, the sort of sacralization of victimhood, which you talked about, there's a sort of men have to sort of show their vulnerability. Yeah, everyone's showing their vulnerability, and it's, for a conservative, that can be kind of a bit cringe. And you say the origin of that is this sort of this marriage between Freud and Marx, which plays out in films like American Beauty, where the Tory or the conservative is that. Yeah, the idea is if you're really homophobic, you're actually gay type thing.
Yeah, because remember, he got upset that Kevin Spacey wanted to hang around his teenage boy son. I mean, what a bigot.
How prophetic.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like that's such a kind of shorthand code in cinema, that if someone has strong conservative religious beliefs, then there's a sort of underlying psychological problem with them that makes them. In fact, I think most of the data shows that like religious conservative people tend to have far fewer affairs. They tend to like cheat less on their finances. Yeah. I mean, like we remember when they behave badly because
it's incongruous.
Because it's incongruous. So everyone remembers, like the preacher who gets caught with a rent boy or something. It's a funny story, but it is overall probably against the kind of trend of things. Yeah. I mean, in the conversely is that we always remember the kind of hypocritical leftist who sends their kids to private school. But overall, I bet they do it less than right wingers do. We just kind of, and I bet overall they actually do live in more diverse areas. Again, we just remember when they don't, live up to their own standards. But yeah, I mean, our culture is very saturated in irony generally. So anyone who has kind of profound, like patriotic beliefs or something, must be like something. There must be something wrong in their heads. It's like, why do you even care? And all those things help to make conservatism, low status, something people are kind of embarrassed amidst by. The crime thing is, the classic example that, Americans arguing about, like American cities, which are much safer than they were like 2 or 3 years ago, but are still by any standards of any civilized country, incredibly violent and just anarchic. And you look around them and think, how can anyone possibly live like this and accept their city centres just full of insane people? And there's a kind of reaction. It's like, oh, well, why are you even bothered? It's like, just go and live in the suburbs if you can't handle like a homeless man screaming at you in the street. It's like, no, they're just terrified of looking like like bourgeois and low status by actually saying the obvious thing, which is like, no, we don't have to live like this. We could just actually, but it's just like very cringeworthy. And
is one of the reasons why academia is so overwhelmingly, or underwhelmingly represented by conservatives, is that it's a high status job with low pay. So you kind of resent.
Yeah.
I've heard the intelligence to net worth ratio. So there's a kind of, you resent people with a low intelligence relative to their net worth as an academic.
Yeah, and
through the crude market forces that enable them to get that.
Because you want status to be derived by things other than money. So, when the Green Party gets elected, your status as an impoverished academic whose Oxford contemporaries all earn 20 times as much as you in the city will be raised. And I mean, that's why academics are incredibly bitter people. I think Taleb said that because, when you're competing over money in life, then that's actually quite a bit more honest. If you're competing over sort of prestige and status, then there's no end to the game.
Who's the audience? Is it the consumer or is it your fellow experts?
Right. And it's just so the competition has to be much more bitter. And that's what his explanation for economics like that.
Was it his definition of wealth his definition of being wealthy was earning more than your wife's sister's husband.
Right, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. It's all relative, right? The education to income ratio does have you can look at that in politics charts and see people who also have, quite low education because they leave school early to become like a market trader and make loads in the city. They are solidly right-wing.
Yes. So Palantir is viewed as quite a right-wing company for whatever reason.
I don't know enough about. I feel like I should be on their side because the people are here who are against them. I just know my enemies.
Obviously found Peter Thiel, who's becoming somewhat of a kind of a leader amongst conservative libertarian people across the transatlantic. Right. Anyway, he was a founder and early investor in the business. But one of the things that Palantir in the UK announced very recently, which was quite interesting, particularly with university debt levels and this whole maybe the question of university being a valid institution or not going forwards, was the kind of Palantir internship.
Right.
So you leave school, you don't go to uni. If you're smart, apply, and we'll pay you 50k, 60k. We'll give you the kind of work experience you need. You don't rack up the debt. You'll get sort of a better CV than you would have done had you spent 3 years getting pissed and drinking coffee for 6 hours.
I mean, it's probably not the worst thing in the world. I mean, I do. It's nice for people to spend 3 years getting pissed and having fun. I mean, I do think there are far too many people doing it right now. For the state of the economy, and so that's going to.
So do you think universities should just go back to, if you're really into 12th century Saxon poetry, and you want to do a PhD on that, but if you want to work in PR or want to, be a clerk in a bank, don't bother to just go get on.
I think at the moment, what is it, like 45%? I mean, I've got quite. I mean, my most libertarian views are on education. I mean, I'm like a school abolitionist in some ways. I would say probably like 20% of people should be going to university the most, maybe 15%, and like 20% of people should be leaving school at 14 to work, basically. Yeah. And then the rest stay to A-levels. But I don't think society is quite ready for my radical idea that people actually hate school and it's a waste of time for a lot of people.
I interviewed, I'll send it to you after, a lady called Rosina Dorelli, who's looking to effectively disrupt the education system she's designed a curriculum which the whole thing of standardized testing, rote learning in an age of AI is effectively kind of dead. And what kids should be doing is basically spending their time starting businesses, growing food, learning kind of proper skills,
Right.
rather than sort of sitting in a classroom kind of memorizing.
I think it's good for most, but I think if you look at it, well, this stuff after when lockdown happened and everyone started saying, "Oh, the kids are going to be all so depressed because they're away from school," and I was like, I think most people hate. I remember thinking most people hate school, right?
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, my own kids, they loved it. And we were a small garden, but I suppose it's some outside space, and they just didn't have to go to school. And then you looked at actually data. Teen suicides went down a lot, and teen suicide correlates to the school term because you go to school where there's a guy literally the worst person in the world, and once he leaves school, you'll never have to go see this guy again. But until then, he's going to make your life a misery. And if you look at,
and you get anxiety when you have to go and see that,
it's horrible. And a lot of people
tomorrow
just
I've got to
just like hanging out, and then the bottom 20% academically, I think it's 20%, don't just learn nothing after 14. They actually go backwards. They've achieved less than nothing in the last 2 years of school. And I remember them from my own school, and they were just stopping everyone else learning. So I do think a lot of people, they should just be in work. I mean, they can work in offices if they want. I think 14-year-olds should be able to work in offices. It's fine. This is my most and all schools should be privatized as well.
Yeah.
But although that might be a disastrous mistake, but I'd like to see it tried somewhere. I think a couple of the US states are going to do it, so that should be exciting.
I'm going to just take another quote from your book.
Okay, you can go
ahead. This is edXL, the National Curriculum Examiner, that defines what conservative ideologies for A-level government and politics.
Oh, right, okay, I remember this.
I don't know if you remember that. Where the edXL, which I remember from doing exams, this defines conservatism as limited, conservative people as limited, dependent and security-seeking creatures supporting resurgent nationalism, insularity and xenophobia.
Yep, totally unbiased.
Yeah, whereas it describes socialism as a being about social stability and cohesion, social justice, happiness, and personal development. And
that's what I think of socialism. I think of all those things.
The worst thing that can be said about socialism is it's an illusion. It's conflict as a motor of history. Anyway, it's quite, to think that there's one department that designs what all education is with one curriculum and one way of learning today is pretty.
Once you have kids in the school system, you see how like obviously biased it is, and how much indoctrination does go on.
Yes, and you see that in kids' books, right? Where a lot of kids' books, I don't know, your kids are probably too old now, but there's a big trend of children's books now. It's all about it's just therapy. There's no it's like the Worrysaurus, you got this.
Oh, I missed that thing. Creature. It was all about amazing women who did daring things or something when my kids were young.
Or like the kid just wants to get free from the shackles of family, and that was back then. But now everything. So
it's all like personal
your feelings, getting in touch with your feelings. Yeah. There's the Grumpy Saurus, for example, and how it gets into.
I think that's. I think that whole thing is really going to be. It is counterproductive, I'd say, but that's probably my natural conservatism. I think again, Scott Alexander said there should be a mental health unawareness week. He said just.
Are you familiar with Adler, Alfred Adler?
Yes.
Have you done much?
No.
I'm gonna because you talk.
He's
about,
like sibling order. That's the main thing, right?
Possible. I mean, I've only just come across him, and I'm gonna butcher it, but because you talk about Freud a lot in the book, and kind of being that Freud was all about what they call etiology, which is kind of causation and sort of deterministic approach to therapy. So something's happened in your life, something outside forces impacted you to become who you are, and you need to introspect and look at your past and see what oppression or trauma caused you to have anxiety or behavioral problems, whatever it might be. And Adler kind of took the opposite view, which is basically was teleology. So like we have created an end goal for ourselves, an identity, and all our behavioral manifestations are furthering us to that end goal. So the end goals you should have, according to Adler, are threefold: work, love, and community. Those are the three things that ultimately, what
Sounds very wise.
Seems very wise. And when you have anxiety or anger issues or neuroticism or imposter syndrome, whatever, all these things that we talk about, all those things are tools that your ego, your identity has created to get you away from those end goals and towards the end goal that the teleology you've crafted for yourself from an early age. So that's maybe a victim, or it's a narcissist,
right?
Or so rather, there's no use introspecting because your memories are self-selected.
I think that's what we do, right?
Sorry.
So it's just going to keep buggering on.
It's this
which is
KBO, and there's a thing called that's taken internet by is kind of a guy called who talks about retard maxing.
Right, okay.
Which I'll send to you, which is on LinkedIn.
I've never heard of it, but I've heard of 100 different things that sound like that.
But
so.
it's kind of a lot of Silicon Valley kind of tech bros are now going on about retard maxing, which is stop writing things down, stop introspecting, just do stuff.
Right, okay.
Just build stuff, learn stuff. Don't think about why. Just try 10 things. 1 will work, 9 won't. Move forwards. Don't keep.
I do think not dwelling on the past is probably a good idea, and just getting on with life. But
and the culture of therapy thing that we talked about.
That's I'm not sure it's very personally healthy. It is worrying. I'm quite an anxious, neurotic person myself, so the kind of level of anxiety in society generally seems to be rising, and I think there is a kind of political culture related to that, which is about the broader mental health thing, which is kind of making it worse.
If you keep asking someone, "Are you anxious?"
Yeah, my advice to myself is just go and lift some weights, and maybe retard maxing is the way forward, or just kind of try to do something constructive with your life, try to make things better in some ways, and don't wallow in anxiety. But I think unfortunately the way humans are developed, a lot of people just can't psychologically live without religion. There needs to be some sort of church structure in their life, and it's just missing, and it's just too low status to start doing it. So,
you open the book with conservatism is fun is at the time of writing, so 2020 looks doomed, barring an apocalyptic event or a Christian revival. Is the latter possibly happening right now?
I don't think there's any evidence to suggest at the moment. There was talk of it, but I wouldn't rule it out. I just think the date. Eventually, I think some people will probably just look at the data, which shows that church attendance is such a big factor in well-being. It doesn't have to be church, obviously, or any religious group. Sorry, that makes me sound so insincere, isn't it? Just any religion, doesn't matter.
No, but
but it's the thing of going together, singing, being in a congregation, meeting people on the Sunday, just getting out of your house, talking to people. It's human beings are, group. We are a very, very social species. We're almost eusocial compared to most mammals. We need to be around other human beings. We completely wither if we're left alone. We're very vulnerable by ourselves. We need to be around people, and a lot of people are just not living that kind of life, and instead getting their kind of sense of community, from terrible political groups and online groups and these kind of fake things.
And this is the downside of activism, I guess, is that you spend your whole time worrying about the world saving the world or the environment, or whatever, whereas actually you might get a sense of agency by doing the beach clean, or kind of picking up the granny and taking her to church because she can't make it on her own. And
it's like the
those
joke
are kind of low status things, though, compared to
much better just
big picture.
About the whole world. Which I just see, so it's just it really annoys me when I read it, saying with the world burning and everything going to hell, and I just think I'm pessimistic, but that's not really true, is it? There's lots of challenges, but you could still take the Steven Pinker argument and say, actually, things are actually really good. They might get worse, but probably not. It's like that joke, that common thing, which I have seen, of the Green Party poster in the front garden and the garden's a complete tip. It's like, just start by cleaning up your garden.
It's very Jordan Peterson, isn't it?
I mean, that's why he's very popular, because I think it's a lot of his, he had the success of, which a lot of kind of preacher types, which is mixing kind of some really wacky stuff with some like really obvious common sense, which has been forgotten in the culture, just have some self-respect and, men and women are different and all the kind of obvious stuff. I think a lot of people probably would benefit by that.
So we spent a lot of time trying to kind of unpack conservatism, see where it's gone wrong, see where its limits are. One of the things that I've been thinking about is the sort of something that someone called Freeman Dyson talks about as the end of the philosopher king. So like, ideas, do ideas have a causal historical role, or is it all about geography and demographics and technology?
Right.
And, if you look at supposedly Aristotle and Alexander the Great had Aristotle and,
so would these things all come up anyway?
Pitt had Adam Smith, Margaret Thatcher supposedly, slammed down Hayek's Constitutive Liberty, said this is what we believe in, and the Earl of Shaftesbury and John Locke were kind of quite, John Locke was a big influence on the Earl of Shaftesbury. And today there is no, it's a bit, ideas don't really matter to politicians, whether it's David Cameron or Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak. It's all about the vibes and all about the kind of what's cutting through, what's on message, what isn't. And do we need a rekindling of interest in ideas again, or are they interested in ideas? And just when Rachel Reeves comes out with something, she doesn't know it's based on something someone has said before her. Like,
no, I mean, who was the last politician who was really interested in ideas in that way? It's only, I suppose, people on the sort of fringe of the party, your Dan Hernandez and stuff, who
Jesse Norman.
Norman, then you've got, there are some. I think there are ideas I see bubbling around, which I think are probably going to emerge. But there is also the point that a lot of politics is just a reaction to something. And it's an attempt to correct something. One of the things this is going to sound completely unlikely, but I do think there is, I think there are the seeds of quite a kind of classical, economically liberal worldview coming back to Britain.
Yeah.
I feel that there are lots of ideas bubbling away, and I think there is a realization about the way the economy is structured in a certain way, which is actually contrary. And I think the most interesting ideas are often the ones that actually people read and think, actually, that's the complete opposite of what I thought. And people have this idea that of Britain is just sort of this kind of the bankers, the bonuses, and then there's like the billionaires don't pay anything, and that we have neoliberalism is out of control, and if you actually look at our levels of state interference and state control, it's actually quite extreme, and I do think it's cause of a lot of our problems. I mean, obviously, planning is the obvious one.
Yeah.
But I think there are the seeds there of a kind of someone who's prepared to, and I think it's probably going to actually happen with reform, even though I think the Reform Party can't really talk about economics because their voters are so divided on the issue, when they are very united on the issue of immigration, which is like Reform voters are all like completely united. But if you look at their actual voters, a lot of them are going to be very left-wing on economics.
There's no kind of maybe we're spending too much conversation happening.
No, and unfortunately, my optimism is like tainted here by the fact that we're going to have to realise this because the money is really running out, and we can't we can't afford this lifestyle we're living. And in some ways, it's kind of worse in the 70s. In some ways, not. I think it would take a politician with a lot of kind of moral strength to actually do what needs to be done. But I think there's a chance that if reform gets into power, I mean, they might not if it's a kind of Green Labour coalition I think you're going to accelerate. But I think we are also so much in debt that there's not much, like a radical left government can't just take over and start printing money because it doesn't exist.
No. But can you disentangle issue? Let's say the two big issues, the economy and immigration. They're not two separate issues, right? Because
no, I mean, and
they are the same thing in that we're in a bit of a Ponzi scheme where you've got a huge welfare state,
right?
Or you've got lots of free stuff, whether it's education, a lot of free housing, free healthcare, and that's some people would argue created an unfair or an unrealistic expectation amongst native workers as to how much work they should be doing or willing to pay, and it's probably easier for them to be on the take or on the dole, and then that's therefore subsidised by cheap foreign labour. That kind of comes in. And
I think it's also aggravated by the size of the state. Like the NHS is one of the most immigration dependent areas for that very reason. If we say in this mad world where we had a higher proportion of private healthcare, which I know most European countries, it's not that much difference, is it? But naturally, doctors and nurses would be paid more because it's not a state monopoly, and more people from Britain would go for those jobs. If you have a state monopoly, then obviously you're just dependent on, and that's the same in loads of different sectors. I mean, obviously, the problem with the Conservative side is that every department will just say, well, we want these exceptions in immigration because we don't have the money to pay all these people. It's a Ponzi scheme. And I think it's just a short-term thing. Unless we decide amongst ourselves that we will kind of create a sort of Dubai-style guest worker thing where people will go home and are forced to go home after their thing, it's just not sustainable from a kind of economic or a kind of political or cultural thing. Yeah. I don't think we've got the stomach for that, because there'll be too many hard cases. It would seem too cruel.
You got a chapter called The Blob. There's something that people like Cummings talk about, or they're actually the real people in charge and not the elected representatives. It's sort of this sort of deep state.
Yeah, I mean the civil service run Britain. I mean,
but it's not just the civil service, right? It's the Quango.
The charity sectors and
charity sectors on the receiving end of
getting paid by the state. And then like in the case of Britain, the Rwanda thing, it was halted by legal objections by charities which are funded by the Conservative government. It's like you're literally funding your enemies to stop what you're doing. I mean that's like the definition of ineptness.
Yeah, it just feels so weird that we can't have an immigration policy that allows a sensible, some skilled workers, a sensible number of people in.
Right.
Why is it so hard to get this issue right? And I'm sure Keir Starmer would love a lower, get government debt down and to have like a net migration of whatever 50k a year or whatever.
I think it's illustrated by the boats problem, which is if you're pro-immigration sentimentally or by temperament, then that is the one thing that you should want to sort out, because it's the most unpopular. It's so unpopular. It's in terms of outcomes, it's the worst possible form of immigration. You're like basically selecting men for propensity to criminality. Loads of terrible cases. You don't know where to put them there, and you can't change the system. Their inability to solve that is the kind of key to why the whole kind of system is going to come crumbling down. Like in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, there's no way we're going to be in the Refugee Convention or the European Convention on Human Rights. I don't think anyone's going to be. They're completely, and Starmer represents that, and that's partly why, on one level, he's hated, because he's like one of those crusty old communist leaders in the 80s who's, he exists to just kind of perpetuate the system. He's not like a firebrand founder. He doesn't have those ideas himself. He believes in human rights laws, and that's what he believes in international law to such an extent that, he wants to give away sovereign territory to a semi-hostile power. He couldn't decide what a man or woman was until the court had actually ruled about it. It's just, he's such
a robot.
He's such a robot. And he's not even his fault. He's completely in the wrong profession. Shouldn't be a politician. And he represents that system, which I think is on its way out. If you could have an immigration policy that, doesn't satisfy most people, but keeps most, people within a certain range happy, and doesn't have terrible social consequences, and selects for good people. but that can't be done while you're kind of have this kind of outdated post-war idea about how the world works, which is what he has. You have to be a bit more selective, but also a bit more ruthless about it, in realistic.
And are you broadly optimistic about Britain's future, or do you think we are in a kind of
the world is burning?
This is the end of the Roman Empire type thing, or this is sort of Gondor?
I don't know. I think, the next 5 years are going to be that aren't looking great. All the measures are looking quite bad, aren't they? I do worry that the demography is looking very bad. Two aspects of demography. I do think, firstly, is the aging population is going to be a real problem. It's not terrible. Population goes down, but it's going to be incredibly financially hard, especially if people think they're going to get pensions at 65 or whatever. It's just not going to happen. Or that kind of money is running out, and the pressure on things like the health service are going to become unbearable because if people look at how much healthcare costs per age, it just rapidly goes up once you get into your 80s. The other one is like the immigration-related issue. I think I'm not like one of those Civil War bros, but I do think that as diversity gets to a certain point, the risk of quite bad sectarianism, maybe some slightly violent, but definitely, politics defined by religion and segregation that's already happening. And if you just look at demography, then the risk of that becomes much higher. The further things and things will change quite rapidly because the white British population is a certain level, but it's much older, so a lot of them will die quicker. So I think like the future place like Birmingham is going to be quite bad. On the other hand, Britain has like so many inbuilt advantages. It's like London is such a great city. The whole area between London, Cambridge and Oxford has such a huge number of like skilled, so much like social capital there. Yeah. And there's so many.
Shout out to Chelmsford.
Chelmsford, of course, that famous quadrangle. There are so many attractions, and it's still, it still rates so highly for so many different measurements. Place to do business with, like legal system. That I don't think it would take much to take advantage of those
and turn around.
Yeah, I think so.
So let's talk a bit about your day job. You've got this Substack, The Wrong Side of History, and you do a lot of travelling. By the sound of it, from when I read
just the last couple of years.
But it's like you're almost becoming a travel writer.
Midlife crisis.
Is it? You were in Barcelona this week or last week, and
this week
you've been in Singapore, you've been in America. So what's caused you to do that? How come you're applying all your views on political history, theory, to kind of going around the world and commenting on that? Let's talk about Singapore, for example, and what your takeaway was from that trip.
Yeah, interesting place. It's quite strict. They outlaw vaping, so I was so furious.
Anywhere and everywhere.
Literally can't do it. They can't buy it. If you find you, they might deport you.
If they find a vape on you.
Yeah, no one vapes. Smoking's fine, which is ridiculous. But anyhow, Singapore, it was an interesting kind of place because they have a kind of model of multiculturalism, which is founded on the reality of their demography on the foundation. They had a very vulnerable situation. It was majority Chinese, but also Malay and Indian minorities, and they were worried the whole thing could have just blown up. There were race riots, and so they kind of created this system, which includes sort of the state basically deciding where you live. It's it's obviously very safe, so it's nice to be not have to worry about your phone getting stolen. But it's quite a strict vibe.
Yeah.
There are other places which are just as safe, which feel more relaxed, like Japan, for instance.
Yeah.
Like Japan is also. Japan was a real eye opener. I hadn't really been to the Far East or those parts of Asia. before. I missed that. I just didn't go traveling in my teens, which I regret, and then in my 20s and 30s, I had kids or no money, and so now I've just taken the chance to go some places.
The youth is wasted on the young, right? And
definitely,
actually, you can get way more out of traveling now.
We've been to a couple of Asian trips. We can't really afford it anymore, so we're not going to do it. But it was indulgent. But yeah, a couple of them took the kids to Sri Lanka and Vietnam, and that was really nice. And I thought they might get something out of seeing something, a very different culture. It might be. Yeah. I'm trying to justify I basically want to go on holiday. And is this like an investment
thing? Yeah.
I think it's good to see other cultures and see how things work. It's always worth it.
So, as you know, I like to kind of try and wrap these. Well, I think I'll give you a heads up. We try to wrap these conversations up with something I call the long bet, which is, I guess we've kind of touched on it a bit, but right. You extend it. You talked about 5 years. Let's talk about 10 years. Let's extend the time horizon. Make a prediction of something you think will happen in the next 10 years, or something you would like to happen, or both. And all answers except kind of world peace, which I don't think I'm going to hear, judging by what you've just said, are welcome.
Well, I mean, I think the obvious one that comes to mind, it's very hard to predict stuff except demography, which is already kind of baked in. So we know we're all getting older. I mean, all of us are obviously, but the average age of Western countries is rapidly becoming a stage where I think that the competition to get young workers is really going to be one of the characteristics of the next few years. It's why I think I'm slightly optimistic there might be a sort of revival. I wouldn't say Thatcherism. Thatcher's so disliked in the kind of public consciousness. Again, she's kind of lost the kind of cultural war. Yeah. She lost the war of memory. But I think in 30 years' time, she'd actually be more respected than she is now.
With a bit of distance.
I think once once people have stopped watching those like Ken Loach films about the mines shutting down, and just actually, if you look at the state of the economy in the 70s, so I do think there will probably be a kind of slight return to a more economically liberal policy in Britain, government. I do think Reform probably will win the election.
Interesting. Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe in coalition with the Tories. Which I think the general trend in... I know people would accuse me that this is just my fantasizing. I think the general trend in European politics is still going to be going to the right. I think the issue of immigration is so unpopular, and there's these kind of centrists. I don't know how else to describe them. The people in charge. Yeah, well, just the sort of led by the EU. I just feel that they've just got no other ideas now. So yeah, I think there will be a general shift to the right across Europe. I think in America, it's harder to tell, but my fear is that I think Trump's like downsides, even though like some of his policy, his domestic policy seems pretty good to me at a distance, his downsides is kind of his personality and the kind of economic costs of that war thing he's starting is just... I do feel like we're going to get like an even more crazily woke future in America. If you just look at the way that he's kind of really galvanized people, and much more so this time. I mean, it's kind of reflected in the kind of the
woke. You mean like the woke right?
No, I mean the woke left. I mean if they have a kind of a chance at if there's a kind of actually a radical Democrat who could win the next election, I don't know. I don't know enough about the odds of American politics, but I feel like the American institutional structure, his rule might have had the reverse effect. Might have actually, you just basically thrown a stone at a wasp's nest, and now they're really angry. Yeah. And there's no actual institutional like de-wokification in academia. Then you're just going to get even more extreme. So I think that Europe going right, America going left seems likely to me.
Could be a trade. And we can read all of that unfolding on the Wrong Side of History Substack.
Correct.
Written by you.
Yep.
And also we can find you on X, formerly known as FKA Twitter.
Oh yeah, Twitter. I still call it Twitter.
It's Ed J. West? Is it?
No, it's just Ed West.
Ed West, wow,
Yeah.
well done, nailing that.
No, someone else gave it to me actually. Some random American. So thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Yeah, I was like Ed West 5064 or something. He said, "Oh, I only like tweet once a year. You may as well have it." So
God, it gives me hope for the world.
Yeah, it's nice, isn't it? You think like I should have offered him money for it, shouldn't I? It didn't really occur to me.
Yeah,
but he didn't ask for money, so I don't know.
So
well
done.
Yeah, just be nice and American about it.
Well, look, it's been a lot of fun, and I'd love to maybe after the election, and if your prediction does come true, and we can see whatever party is coming in and how they do.
When is the election? Three years time ago.
2029, is it?
Yeah, well, 3 more years of me.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back on. And,
it'd be a pleasure.
And we can see how what we've talked about panned out.
I bet I'm completely wrong.
There's only one way to find out.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ed.
All
Really
right.
appreciate
Thanks
it.
so much.
Thanks so much. This has been Meeting People. I've been your host, Amal Pandya. This is a podcast produced by Matt Cooper with music composed by Loverman.